Welcome. Hello. Thanks for being here. I'm Emily Torty, an agroforester with Appalachian Sustainable Development, and I'm going to be hosting our session today. And I just want to first and foremost say thanks to the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation, whose funding makes this program possible, and a lot of the other programming that we work with at ASD. But I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about ASD and our program, but first, just a big welcome. We're here with Howard Peller and Sarah Lasswell. We're going to talk about Willow for every farm, and this is a subject that's near to my heart as a lover of willow, and I know that we've got a lot of niche willow enthusiasts out there, so thanks for being here, and we look forward to your questions. If you haven't joined us before, this is the format. We're going to just do our little welcome spiel, and then we're going to get into the webinar, introduce ASD, introduce our guests, and then they will have their presentations, and we will move into the Q&A. Thank you again. I've already talked about the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation, but it just really does take a team of folks to put these webinars on every season. So thanks so much to everybody that's involved this season. And here's a little bit about who we are at ASD. Our mission is to grow a stronger Appalachia through agriculture, and our work falls into 5 key buckets. So we work in workforce development, training folks into critical job skills, specifically in agriculture. And a lot of our work focuses on people with barriers to entry into the job market at all. So maybe folks that haven't ever finished their high school diploma, or got stalled out partway through a college degree, or are experiencing houselessness, or have substance abuse issues or prior incarceration. So we're training those folks up into jobs in the agriculture sector. And we have all different kinds of tracks there. So we have like a food truck track, and we have an agroforestry nurseries track, and more of a gardening track. So lots of interesting opportunities there. We also work in agriculture education, training folks through all different kinds of platforms in all different kinds of ag. Food access program, where we are working to deliver food boxes to folks in need. Economic development, helping train farmers to do what they do best. And resource management, which is where technically agroforestry falls, although all of these buckets kind of bleed over into each other. If you're interested more in our agroforestry programs, please check out our website. I don't have as much time to talk about this stuff today because we have 2 presenters, so I'm going to keep it really brief, but anything that you might be curious about ASD's agroforestry program, you can find on the website. And there's tons of resources if you're interested in just learning more about what agroforestry is as well. Thanks so much for tuning in this fall. Just a reminder, we have one more session. Next week, we've got grassroots tree search by farmers, for farmers, with Sam Bonney and Russell Wallach from Bread Tree Farms. And I'm really looking forward to that session. They've got a really interesting origin story about how they've come to doing so much on-farm research and how they've come to the way that they focus that. So it should be a really, really great session. A few ASD impacts to date before we move on. Just up to this point, we have been able to sell and distribute over $40 million in produce, beef, and value-added products through our food hub. We have helped new gardeners grow over 170,000 pounds of food, installed around 250 raised beds, and actually I know that that number is higher now, and preserved over 5,000 acres of forest land, supported and trained over 5,000 farmers with our resources and programming, and donated more than 10 million pounds of local and regional food to area food pantries. So we're really, really proud of all the work we've been doing. If any of this seems exciting, meaningful, powerful to you, and you'd like to support, we've got a Giving Tuesday initiative going on. I mean, us and everybody else, I know. So if you feel moved to do so, please check out our Giving Tuesday campaign. We've got a matching funder to help match 1-to-1 any dollar raised up to 90,000. So we're shooting for 90,000 this year. I think we hit 85,000 last year, and every dollar helps. So please consider it. And thank you also to everybody who has just donated already when they register for Ask an Agroforester. We really appreciate that. I'm going to start with Howard Peller, who's going to present first today. Howard Peller is the founder of Living Willow Farm in Roseville, Ohio, where he grows more than 100 varieties of willow and transforms them into both functional and artistic creations. As we talk with Howard today, you're going to hear all kinds of interesting things from him, but you're really going to see that he has spent just a lifetime in artistry and agriculture and has a wealth of knowledge about these things. And his philosophy really is that of connecting what is grown and what is made. And I'm really excited for y'all to hear from him. His practice honors tradition while showcasing versatility and sustainability of willow as both crop and craft. So welcome, Howard.
Thank you. That was great.
And we also have Sarah Lasswell here today. Sarah is a willow grower and casket weaver in the Appalachian foothills of Western North Carolina. She's been experimenting with varieties, spacing, contour planting, weed suppression tactics, and trying to find a best set of practices for her soil. And this is one of the reasons I'm really excited to have her on today, because I think she has a really great perspective on why this is such a useful practice, or why this is such a useful approach to growing. And I think that expands way beyond just willow. She continues to support the development of the craft by offering internships and apprenticeships in both weaving and willow cultivation, and also provides education and support for natural burial and caring for our own after death. So Sarah's in a really, really sweet and special niche in the willow world, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from her as well. I'm going to go ahead and just say one more time, welcome. We're here to talk about willow today, the ultimate multi-use plant. And we named the session Willow for Every Farm, and it really was sparked for me wanting to track down some folks for this session out of just this realization of how helpful willow is in the landscape in so many ways. And I just feel like it's sort of underutilized or just not really recognized in the way it could be. And I think that people often think that willow is a thing for craftspeople only, or for soil remediate or stream bank remediation only, or they'll sort of put it into these boxes. And I think what we're hoping to unpack today is the functionality of willow in all kinds of different spaces and uses. So this is less of a business class, let's all learn to be willow farmers. This is more of a how can a willow fit into my landscape in a really healthy, useful way? And how can I sort of leverage some of these functionalities that Willow is so generously offering to us? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Howard. Welcome, Howard. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks. Thank you for the introduction, and good to be part of the conversation. I actually enjoyed seeing the profile of what you're accomplished as a group. That's really great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think in terms of the way you've framed Willow, I would have to also advocate for its beauty and also for its integration in the natural ecosystem, because it's one of the things I think is because we've drained so much land and remove so many of the wetlands where willow naturally has a tendency to grow. We've lost food sources for our the rest of the things that are important to our ecosystem. So just those things in itself are really important to mention.
Yeah.
Well, uh, it's kind of hard. I was about 55 when I started to work with willow, and there's a whole backstory. I've been crafting and designing and making things for over 50 years, and um, one of the things that I'm asking to just kind of focus with willow is to understand that willow has had a long history in human culture. People probably they learned to grow straight sticks for basically that's what what the core of the application is for years people have learned to make spears and things of that nature. But it's also very inspiring in the art world. And if you look back in European artwork like Matisse or Van Gogh, or you'll see that there's people on the left slide there, you'll see the inspiration that came from willow. And of course, willow grows by streams. These are two of my pieces. I'm not trying to say they're equivalent, but it's how you use willow to create art. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a picture. It becomes a living thing or a static or interactive thing. That one on the right is a hut that I did. I've done a number of these huts for play, and the one in the middle is actually my first living piece that I made about 13 years ago. Okay. I live in Appalachia too, it's the foothills, and I wanted to grow something on my farm that I could use in my work. It was that was the very simple concept of it, and it actually came out of my experiences around the world working with other plants and other materials. And so the core process is really about growing, harvesting, and then making something, whatever it is, or using it in some way. So that's kind of my, from a perennial product, I didn't want to grow annuals, and I wanted something that was sustainable and was sequestering carbon and that sort of thing. So that was kind of the basis for my existence. So just as a kind of reminder, I think this gets to some of the things Emily was talking about. Farms almost always in past year in our history, if you look backwards to look forward, you'll see that how much willow was used in Europe in small farms. Just they were plots. They were used for. And the right hand is an etching by Van Gogh, and the left is a painting by Van Gogh. And you can see there's in the left there's two expressions of willow. One is the willow field below it, which has all those colorful lines, and then the pollards, which are the taller trees, and you can see that also on the right. And the pollards were used for, to have your herds would go under, they wouldn't be able to eat the willow, and then the willow was cut for their food in the wintertime. But it was very typical for farms to use that. So this was my first real big plot. It used it actually the picture on the left on top was sort of after that I took all the wood and all the debris that was laying down, and I had to kind of reform the site, but it I didn't really change the structure of the site so much as just kind of cleaned it up. Anyway, the first step for me was using this plastic, you know, um, landscape fabric, which I highly suggest to not use, but it was what I started with many years ago. Um, it is a convenient way to do it, but at that time I drilled holes and measured everything carefully, and I had different. I've worked 15 years now in planting, and I have every single year I plant a different arrangement because I'm always learning. And it also depends how you're harvesting. So I'll just show you real quickly some other. These are in these some of these use plastic and some don't. And these are in lowland sites. And this is a grove that has nothing, but they're very densely populated in a row, but the rows are spread apart enough. And there's no plastic. It was mulched a couple of times, and that was it. And it's in a beautiful sector of the farm. And this was a bottom grove. Sarah, when you came, you probably saw this one. This is an old one, probably getting ready to retire. It was set up to harvest with hopefully a machine. It didn't work for me, so I'm going to abandon that completely, this grove. Um, and this is another one by Marsh. This was a combination of no plastic and plastic. I try to see too where I grow it, highland and lowland, and the different types of soils to see how it affects the colors of the willow and how they respond, because they do respond very differently. Um, Quick slide of coppicing. This was really early. That's my dog Willow. She's still with me, 13 years since. So she's sleeping over in the side there, and that's me a little pudgier than I am now. But uh, the willow harvest goes into now a big barn. We didn't have this the time I started, and it's all hand sorted and hand sized. And um, now just some quick applications in the actual production. I do a really wide range. I don't think there's many people that do the variety of things I do. But these are garden boxes and beds. Some are combinations of the bed and the willow. This is something I don't practice, but I have some pictures of, which I mentioned before. And this is the pullard hay, growing it up on for feed. And there's different cycles of running your sheep through or your animals through, and maybe Sarah has more information she can share on that later. Um, the tradition of herding animals was originally people would nail together fencing and not I'm sorry, not nail, but they'd weave some fencing out of poles, and in Europe hazel is probably a dominant material with willow. And a couple of these are my pictures, but a couple on the top are not mine. But otherwise, not really almost 100% of this is my stuff. This is my examples of some recent wattles that I've done. I'll show you a few. This one was done in California. And this is a more sculptural one. That was a moon gate. And this is a meditation wall that I did in New York City a few years back. Um, there are many more examples on my website, and they're all different. The wattles that are this is that fairy hut that was on the first page. I actually build this in the ground. It's an old tradition for willow work, making baskets in the ground, making boats in the ground. I like working that way, but it doesn't always work. This one was also done that way. This is a sculpture. I did a series of pieces I did for a sculpture in Chicago for the architectural biannual. Those were made in the ground. This I had to build a jig to weave and spin it around so I could weave it. They were for the Bellagio Hotel, so they're quite large. Um, and this gets into living fencing, which is my favorite. Uh, is really the more trees, the merrier for me. The more, it affects the betterment of our land, and um, it also they are great barriers. They are deer resilient, and they're really a great resource. I'll just quickly go through some here. This is a very early living dome, but I do all kinds of well, I think I do have some samples in here. This is a canopy that I did in Brooklyn. Um, this is more on the sculptural large scale level. This is in for an estate. I've done a number of these type of pieces now. They're really large, and if you want to see more of a you can just go to the website Living Willow Farm. This is because this presentation, I should say, is aged. It's a couple years back. So this is a willow maze that's quite large and really turned out really wonderful. You can actually see how it's been woven year after year, and it's stunning. It's just taken a few years of going back and reweaving it, and it's then getting into another really great application is the stream banks. And I've done some work. This I have actually done some workshops on. I tend to be very private, and I do one-on-one workshops, but I have gone off and started to do some workshops on how to do this and how to control, and I'll show you an example, one locally here. This was in Pittsburgh. This was a terraced piece. Uh, I just got back from India when I did this because I was working with grasses there, and I was terribly sick when I did that piece. I remember. This is more in keeping with the tradition that people think about when they think about willow and craft. Is these are some of the baskets that I've made years prior. I've worked with a lot of other materials, but this is just a willow presentation. So these are wood and willow combinations, and also interior. I do, I do woven walls now and ceilings, and these were lighting fixtures. And I've done things for whole stores and their lighting. This was the couple of these pictures are not mine, the top three, but this is that tradition of boat. The bottom three are of making boats, and that's jigged. You don't have to do that. Obviously, you can do it in the ground like I'd shown you. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Howard. All right. Thank you so much. Sarah, would you like to go ahead and share your screen?
Absolutely. All right, my name is Sarah Lasswell, and my farm is Moss and Thistle Farm. The photo down here in the bottom, the aerial shot, was about 2 years in. There's a pond and a hay meadow, and then where the little white dot is, that's a cultivated field. The family before us had lived there 75 years, and they had used that field to continuously plant corn and soybean for cattles over the years and plowing and tilling the soil over and over. So when we got there, it had been vacant about 10 years and the soil was just red hard pan clay. The first step for us was to start cover cropping. I started a flower farm in 2018. And so the idea was that we would build the topsoil and turn it over to cut flower production. So we went with several different cover crops and spent a few years doing that. But unfortunately, you can see on the left photo there, the hay meadow, the green part, is in elevation just a little bit above that field. And so what kept happening is the rain would come sluicing down off that hay meadow and wash all my beautiful topsoil into the woods year after year. And so in 2019, I decided to plant a row of basketry willow. I love willow. And when we bought the farm in 2016, I planted some weeping willows, I planted some pussy willows. When I had the flower farm, I was growing some willow varieties just for the pussy willow cultivation. But I decided to do a row of basketry willow to try to stabilize the soil and stop the erosion. So this was planting these first basketry willow varieties. I went to Steve at Dunbar Willow in Washington State, and he had a basketry willow pack. It was 60 cuttings, 6 varieties, 5 cuttings per variety. So I just threw that into the ground and it went well. And so the next year I decided to do 60 more. He also had a pack that was the living structure variety pack. So we put that in the ground. And the first year I had used the plastic, like Howard said, that's kind of the traditional, not traditional, conventional way. That's the way they do it in the UK a lot. When they tell you how to plant willow, they tell you to use the landscaping fabric. And for me, I'm down in North Carolina and it gets very, very hot, and that is a very exposed field. And so the heat on my first willow row was very intense, and I was worried that it was stunting my crops. So the second year, I decided I would try to deep mulch it. And so that's my deep mulched crop there. And we have incredibly intense weed pressure in North Carolina in general, and especially in this field. And I could not keep up with the weeds. And that's sort of a key thing in your first year with your new cuttings is to keep those weeds down so that your plants can get established. And that row of 60 that I did with the mulch is permanently stunted. So when I take people down to see the field, I show them the stunted row. So in my third year, that's when I had decided to start doing willow caskets and I was going to start growing more. And so in year 3, I did 800 cuttings and I did each row different. I spaced them differently. I did plastic, I did no plastic. I tried some more deep mulching, tried plastic with straw on top that you can see there, as well as testing different varieties to see what would work in our soil. Um, and another thing I was doing, you can see in the background there, I was running two little small pet pigs to try to turn the soil before we were doing the planting and really kind of get some of the really persistent weeds taken out before we went in with the willow. And so you can see my soil on the left. We did decide to start turning in compost based on our testing and everything with our soil. We found that turning in compost, we did do an initial till with that compost and then cover it with the plastic, and then we just don't touch it again. Just a quick note on varieties. So there are, like Howard said, he grows 100. I grow about 30. I've selected my varieties based on what I was going to be using them for. For me, that's casket weaving. So I have different parts of the casket that need different lengths and diameters of willow. And so over the years, with help from folks like Howard and other growers, really figuring out which varieties were going to give me the willow that I needed for my work, and then also finding out what was going to really work in my soil. And so you can see these are second year plants, both of them. The one that's huge there, that's the Rubykins variety, which I've found in my land is, we call it the superstar because it grows huge and giant and barky every year. So in year four, that's when things were kind of established. I decided I was going to plant the whole field with willow. And so you can see my little plan there, and all the different rows or the different years of planting. And so there's a keyhole entry, and you enter through these archways. And to the left of that was my year four planting. And I got a grant from WNC Ag Options, which is tobacco money for use for Western North Carolina farmers. And so that grant allowed me to plant 1,200 cuttings at the same time. And I worked with Howard on that grant, and he helped me select the varieties that I was going to grow. And we got those 1,200 in. And you can see on the drawing from the back of the keyhole entry, all of the rows coming off of that are in these concentric arcs. And that was watching the water flowing over the soil and seeing where it was traveling. And so we could move the willow through the field, working on contour with these kind of ribs coming off of the main aisle, but it was still gaining momentum as it hit halfway through the field. And on the third row back, I kind of etched in a little dark spot there. That's where the water moving over the top of the soil has finally stopped. And that was really kind of our victory point when we were able to finally capture that water and keep it from washing all of our topsoil into the woods. And so we are in our seventh year. So 2019 was my first little row of basketry willow. And then 2025, we didn't get a whole lot in. The hurricane hit at the end of 2024. And so early 2025, we managed to get a couple hundred cuttings in, but it really kind of set us back quite a bit. We are at about 3/4 of an acre. I've got about 6,000 plants in the ground. And the year four planting that I did in 2022, the big one, that's just now really hitting a size where I should be able to provide all of my own willow for my business this year, which is really exciting. And then you can also see from the diagram that the idea behind the planting was that this was going to be an interactive space. So when people come to work with me on weaving willow caskets, I like to be able to take them down to the willow to see it growing and to learn about it, to have a relationship with it. It's an incredible plant. Folks can come down and walk up and down the aisles. The center space becomes, it can be a memorial space, a sacred space for weaving. I've had folks camp down there surrounded by the willow. And that has been one of the most rewarding things, is really seeing people get to come down and meet the willow. So these pictures, you can see that third row there catching the water and stopping our erosion. So this is where I'm at now. This is a post-hurricane aerial view. It's a little grim, but you can see how everything worked out. We did continue with the black plastic fabric, as you can see. I cover it with straw, so you can see the top two rows there. that they're lighter because they have the straw. So I try to keep the straw on the first couple years while it's getting established. And I have started taking up some of the fabric on the older crops and underplanting with clover, which is also what we've planted in between the rows with. And so I have a flail mower, and we go up and down the rows with a flail mower to return nitrogen to the soil. And that's really the only additive that we use in the soil. This is it now. This is Luna demonstrating the center walkway. So the willow that's growing on either side of her is going to be woven into living archways. And then you can see this is about, oh, May, maybe early June, the size of the willow growing back there. We cut it down to the ground every winter while it's dormant. This is in high summer. It gets anywhere between 5 feet and 12 feet, depending on the variety. And this is what it looks like now. And if we don't cut it back, then we get the lovely pussy willows. And these are actually pussy willows going to seed, which is one of the earliest things to come out in flower on our land. So it's absolutely covered with bees on the rows that we let go into pussy willows. And as Howard talked about, it's all graded and cut by hand. That's my barn where we store our crop, and I'm hoping to be able to build a better storage facility in the coming year to be able to keep things aerated because of our high humidity. Mold is always a concern. So we need to keep the air moving and keep space between the willow bundles. And so these are just a few pictures to show kind of people coming out and participating in the land. This was a local trail building group in our small rural county that had heard about the willow. And it was during the winter when they didn't have a lot of trail maintenance. And so they asked if they could come out and participate in planting. So this was them out helping with the planting. And then on the right here is our little local newspaper did an article about the willow and how the trail building group had come out to participate. So it was just a really nice, like, local embrace of what we're doing on the farm. These are some of my casket weaving clients that the family here that's helping harvest, that was that winter. And it was the 1 year anniversary of them having woven a casket for their child. And so they came back and it was really lovely. They made the comment that they felt that they were paying it forward to the next year's families that would be coming to weave caskets with me. And so this was last December, and they're planning on coming again this coming December. And then this is on the right, this is a family, and their dog's name was Willow. And so as Willow was aging and we were working on her casket, they would bring Willow to run through the willow field. And actually, this place where they're standing now, they ended up donating money to do a willow planting in Willow's honor, which is now in that spot where they're standing. And so these are just a few of my pictures on the homestead of how we've used willow. So on the bottom left, that's one of the coracles that Howard was talking about. I went to Wales this spring and learned how to weave coracles. So I'm looking forward to doing that this year. And above that, we're planting a living willow seating area. It's a half circle with a bench inside that'll be woven into a half dome. And then casket weaving, the top right, that's my house bunny. And Willow is a great snack and teething chewing toy for pet rodents and rabbits and other small creatures. So my local pet store, I provide them little twig bundles of willow sticks that they sell to people to give to their rabbits and other small creatures. And then the bottom right is the pussy willow, which I do keep in the perennial section of our farm where you can still come and walk through the flowers. I have several pussy willow varieties that grow there that we let go into pussy willows each year and then cut those. And I share those with families that come throughout the year as a souvenir of their time. And so that's all I prepared. I knew Howard would give us a really excellent view of kind of all of the things that willow can be, but these are just a few of the ways that we've used it. And when I first came to the farm, I started using willow just as a homesteading tool, and it really never was my goal that I would be making a living and supporting my family from the farm and from what we grew. But willow has given us the opportunity to do that, and I'm forever grateful to this beautiful plant.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Both of these presentations have been so lovely and visual. Thank you for all just showing us what you two have been up to. So I see a few questions going into the chat. We're going to start with the questions that we've sort of identified ahead of time and received from folks ahead of time. And so let's start from the perspective of someone who's thinking about Willow on their site. What do folks need to know to appropriately choose Willow for their site? And in general, this is going to be one of those conversations, I'm well aware, where everything is going to be, well, it depends. But what are like the broad parameters that folks maybe need to research about their space before figuring out what kind of willow might work for them?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the variety, I think there's the issue of what's going to work best on your land, but it's really what you're going to be doing with the willow. And the different willow varieties and species are going to have different sizes, different things that they're going to be better for. There's some varieties that do really well for stream bank restoration and creating that, block of the soil. And then you have your basketry varieties. And then the living structure varieties, which are going to give you the height that you want to create those structures. So for me, I think I sampled a lot of varieties for the first, especially because I had this dense clay soil that had been so abused. I just had a feeling that it was going to really depend on the kinds of willow that wanted to grow in the soil. And so I spent a really long time just sampling varieties to see how they do. And for me, I'm really glad I did that because there were certainly varieties that just absolutely did not want to grow in my soil. And then others like the Rubicons, which has grown so well that it's unusable for my casket work and it's still great for living structure work. And I, use it for that just around my homestead. But if I had planted 500 of those, I'd be in trouble.
Well, I mean, just to add, there's things like in Europe, they love black mall and with the Triandra family, and I had terrible luck growing it here on the farm, and it's every site is going to be a little different. I think, if I would just say from as a professional, a grower and maker, I could probably just grow a half a dozen varieties, and that's all I need. I really don't need all the varieties that I grow. It was, and some of them I'll eliminate. I'll just keep a little bit of genetic information here because it's not. I mean, to give you an example, in the classification systems, there's things like Salix purpurea, and there's willow that are all related to that. They all look very similar. They all have about the same tensile strength, whether it's Streamco or Eugenie, or they seem almost identical. There's like a dozen of them that you don't need to grow all of those willows to. So I did a lot of experimentation with marginal land and wet areas and dry areas. And best thing for people, is just to rely on somebody who's actually done it and cut to the chase, I think is kind of because you could just experiment. You could do lots of experimentation, but and I mean, I agree with Sarah. I would have told Sarah not to use the Rubicons, for instance. I'm sorry if I don't mean to step on toes, just because I have a little bit of it, and if I just want to chop its heads off all the time because it absolutely just is this massive thing. And I'm glad I just had a small little test section of it. But if you're starting out new, I think you were asking about conditions too. It's like you have to have access to sky. So it's not a shade plant. It's not that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that forest can't be around it and cast shade on it, but it needs open sky. Its nature is to reach to the sky, it doesn't reach outward like some species like black willow nigra. They reach outward. You can see because they're always in wetland areas trying to compete. So they have a natural tendency to kind of go out and then up. And the way we're growing willows, the way Sarah is and I, it's in a way that we're trying to get them to grow straight. Some of these varieties will grow branchy if you let them, but it all depends on how you interplay them together. And there's just most sites soil-wise are going to support willow growth. The key is water and then having UV light. Those are the two things you have to have is water and UV light. It will not grow with dry, environments, and it won't grow without having UV light. But does not have to have direct sunlight, and it can be in shade part time. So to answer the original question, those are the conditions that I try to suggest to most people who call me, and I usually pick varieties for people at this point now. It's just, on my website, there's a download PDF where I've set up what I recommend certain species for. I mean, it's useful as a guideline.
I think this is a good segue into the next question, which I know this is sort of like a details question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I know people want to know. So, and also because you specifically said you're like, I could probably pare it down to 6 species at this point. Like that's for 6 varieties. That's all I really need. So I'd love to hear a few of y'all's favorite varieties and what specific uses, like what their specific uses are.
Well, at this point, I mean, my main use is casket weaving. And so it's willow basketry, but specifically larger rods. I guess one of my favorites is bleu. It's the French word for blue. It has a really gorgeous violety blue color with a bloom to the bark that's just really gorgeous. German basket and Americana tend to be kind of that are just the old reliables. Like they grow the same height, the same amount every year, year after year. Like I can always count on them. They tend to be pretty resistant to aphids and some of the other like minor pests that do get into the willow. I mean, I do like the rubikins. I use that for, like I said, those archways and some of the living structures just because it is so big and so dense. It's not the best for weaving, but it's worked really well in terms of structural things on the homestead, as well as just putting out, like if, cutting the rods, but then using them to create lattice work and heavier things that are going to be moved around the farm. I do like it. And also it's just one that grows really easily on my land. And I really like packing twine. That's just become one of my favorites to work with. It's a pale greeny color that I just really like.
Very nice. What about you, Howard?
I don't think I can answer that so easily. I do most of my living structures now with plant that's called Coriangi and another one that's called Miabina. They just perform really well. They root well, and but then there's whole families of things like and the fragilis, and they're good rooters. These are the yellow. These are in the family of, and they're related to the albas. They're all yellows and oranges, and they're neat plants, but they don't have as much use. I mean, they're good for things like uprights and things like that in the basket, or they're good for they become more tree-like. So, I mean, I'm weaving with packing twine right over here. I would say a really good one would be Dickey Meadows is probably, I think, worldwide famous for it's European, but it's actually a good producer, and seems yeah, but it's related to so many other ones but it stands out a little bit as being a little thinner. It depends, there's thin rods, there's medium rods, there's thick rods. They grow long and short. Some are, one of the problems you'll find if you're trying to grow after you've done it for a few years is you'll see, environmental issues come up. So, you've got, droughts, you've got aphids, there's sawflies, there's all kinds of things to deal with. It's not for the faint. It seems easy at first, but long term it becomes, I mean, just telling you for 15 years now, it's like any other, it's a little bit like other crops. It's not an annual, so you don't have to plant it every year. And it takes at least, I think, 3 years to really establish themselves correctly. But so I like, there's things I like visually about certain ones. And I mean, if people like the, pussy willows, there's one called Mount Azo that's really, really stunning for a decorative. And so there's just so many there's so many. I mean, that's a problem. There's more varieties even than what I have. I just have to stop. Um,
Yeah, that's great. We're not, I mean, and we're not going to get through them all, that's 100% okay. It's just nice to hear some of the top of the brain varieties. What, in y'all's opinion, are some of the underrated uses of willow on the farmscape? I think this is something that I want to make sure we give a little moment to, because I think that people think they need to have willow and expertise and how to weave and how to do all these things, but I think there's also a lot of moments where you can just you know clip a rod and peel
oh,
the end and turn it into a trellis without too much effort, and I think there's some low-hanging fruit like that gets ignored. So I'm curious what y'all might have to say about that.
I would encourage people just to plant just for nature. I think that would be, I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily a end all crop. There's lots of great uses for the bark of willow and mulching. It's very good for digestive systems and sheep. It's very good for I've seen these articles of helping with intestinal worms. I've seen articles with, orchards with the bark being really valuable for keeping fungal problems down. So it doesn't have to be, structures and baskets and coffins and, all that stuff that we do. It's really has a lot of other applications and people really did use it as they called it pullard hay. They used it because they would run out of straw in the wintertime, and there was a feed for their animals. So it's legitimately, something to think about depending on the scale of your thing. But it's not things I do. I can't give you like real. I've tried to mulch it. It's really hard. We have a hammer mill. We tried big gas chippers, and another thing you might throw out there too is medicinal use, because there's two types. Well, there's the salicin that's in willow, which is actually really important for why I've studied this, is that the amount of salicin has a lot to do with the growth. So more salicin, it grows slower. It's less salicin, it grows bigger. It's also the less salicin, has the sugar content is a little better for animals. The higher salicin is, some animals don't like it, like deer, for instance, don't like the higher salicin, so they tend to stay away from those species that have that. A good example would be Daphnoides is a group that, although there's so much salicin in this one, that I've noticed the deer rub their antlers on it because they have blood vessels on their antlers. And so I keep thinking that that's kind of a connection there where they're trying to rub that particular variety. I've been trying to figure that out. So there's lots of other things to do with it. So I think
And I just want to throw out there rooting hormone. It makes an
yeah,
excellent rooting hormone, so you
yeah.
can make a little tea out of it and use it around the farm with all of your plantings, things like that. And then just a plug for the lost art of coppicing, which isn't just with willow. Historically did it with various trees and agroforestry. But just this idea that, you can cut this plant back and it's going to regrow year after year. And so you'll cut it back, and maybe one year you make a living fence out of those cuttings. The next year you weave a basket. The next year you put it into cuttings to do a whole nother bed. It's just this plant that keeps going, and you can find a different use for it every year.
Yeah.
Actually, poplar is a really good coppice a tree. I spent some time in Kashmir with a group that I work with, and they actively use coppicing for their lumber from poplar. It's really cool to see these really large rods put in the ground and how quickly they become lumber for their homes and stuff. So
Yeah, New Zealand has a lot of expertise in that large rod planting for, reforestation and fodder blocks too, with poplars. It's really interesting. And if coppicing is interesting to y'all too, in the audience, we've got, if you go back to the Ask an Agroforester playlist on YouTube. The first season we had Mark Krawczyk on talking about coppice agroforestry too. So we unpack a lot of those concepts pretty deeply. All right, we have a huge Q&A going on here. So I'm going to start moving into those questions. So let's start with this. Are y'all self-taught in your Willowcraft, or did you have mentors to learn from? And maybe Sarah, why don't you take that one to start?
Yeah, so my first step, I did a lot of reading. I think the first really book I found, it was a 1918 U.S. Forestry Service booklet on willow. They were trying to introduce willow as a cash crop. And the techniques for growing willow have not really changed. The tools haven't even really changed for harvesting and weaving. And so that was kind of my introduction, but mentors have been hugely important. Howard was one of my early mentors. Abby at Appalachian Willows has helped me a lot. Steve at Dunbar Willows um, was really helpful. But I think because my soil was so bad, trial and error was kind of where I had to land.
For me, it's lots of people I've worked with all over the world. I mean, some of the projects that I've learned, from so many. I did have the good fortune of going to the school in Lichtenfels for a few months to study in the old. It's the Flecht work. It's called in German with Weiden. Weiden is the word for German willow. So I did spend a few months with a lot of young people there, and that was kind of cool. But honestly, I've always been very independent. I do hop on here and there with people, but I usually end up sharing back and forth. And so I would say there's another school too if people really are interested. It's in France. These are the two old schools, and then there are a lot of English people who have whole classes because it's one of as well as there are some American people hold classes. I do one on like limited workshops, but it is a way that, particularly in England, that people make an income by doing class. There's a lot of classes in England. Yeah, it'd be hard for me to mention mentors. It goes all the way back to people taught me my whole life and shared with me. So I don't even know where to begin, but I'll give a shout out to Uwe at the school in Germany. I know he's not listening, but he was a classic German willow maker, and there was a couple really excellent Germans that were fantastic in their skills and I never tried to be them. And what I do is really independent. It's kind of my own willow world, I suppose. So
Thank you. So there are a couple of questions about plastic versus no plastic. So maybe let's talk about that briefly. I mean, you guys already hit some in your presentations, but if you're not using plastic, what are you using to control the weeds? And what does that maintenance look like?
Sarah mentioned this too about I think you did mulching. So mulching will suppress weeds. Chickens are wonders at pulling weeds and bugs out. If you're really into that kind of relationship, that I've seen it firsthand, it works great. We have a whole area where the chickens went through, and they did a wonderful job. But honestly, on a large scale, um, in England, they use herbicides. It's really typical. And then, they have their farms are set up. The reason the cost is less too is their farms are set up for large scale machines to cut it. And I grow about 12 acres, and I still am hand cutting everything and hand sorting everything. And where I'm trying to go is a little bit what Sarah mentioned about cover. I've used cover crops like clover. Where I'm trying to go is trying to work out the spacing of the willows so that I can better manage them. I'd say it's really difficult. You can use strips of I've experimented with strips of plastic that then can be removed, and if anybody out there, I'll tell you one thing you could help me with is I've found a biodegradable resource that's lasts at least 3 years, and that's really what you need. You need 3 years to sustain your crop, and then it needs to disappear. But I'll
Mm.
tell you, as someone who's grown 15, started 15 years ago when I used plastic, removing it is the worst thing I've ever seen. It's dreadful. You're tearing up the soil, you're tearing the roots, these really big root heads out. It's really disturbing what turned into a really wonderful crop into something that has really given me a lot of hesitance about, in terms of any future plannings. And I mean, it really is easy. It's really the way to, but it has so many downsides to it. If you either have to keep it extremely clean, um, it does get hot, so the first year is really is tenuous about you just end up scorching the material that you planted. I don't know if I answered everything. Maybe Sarah has something else she can add to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I said in my presentation that for my land, the landscape fabric has just been really important. Covering it with straw to deal with the heat issue. I have pulled up some in years 2 and 3 and underplanted with clover, and that's worked really well. I did experiment with some underplanting clover from the beginnings with the cuttings, and that actually worked really well. But there was still, a certain amount of weed maintenance that I just wasn't able to keep up with. So it's kind of been the necessary evil for me. And I might be in a honeymoon period. It might be that in another 5 years things do go south. But at least at this point, I've not encountered any issues really with removing it. I haven't seen the roots get integrated into the fabric. I have a really high water table in the field where I plant, and I think they do just kind of go straight down into it and are happy chappies. But yeah, the clover for the underplanting, both in the pathways and within the rows themselves, has done really well.
What type of clover are you using?
I've used a little bit of everything. I like some of the lower white Dutch low-lying ones so they don't get too tall.
Hmm. Yeah, we put in a willow block at ASD's Ag Campus last spring, and I was shocked by how quickly we had to widen out the holes, and then how quickly we had to widen them a second time before, they were trying to just like, it is just such a quickly establishing plant. And I was just blown away by like how fast I was like, I feel like we just widened these. I didn't want to widen them too much and then have like all of this stuff sprouting out right around them. But then I was like, oh my gosh, we have to do this again already. So
Yeah.
yeah, even that has been interesting.
Well, when I plant, I cut in like an X into the plastic and plant into the center of the X. That way it kind of still suppresses weeds, but it gives it room to grow within the plastic, so you don't have to cut it wider for at least 2 or 3 years. That
Yeah.
way I don't ever push straight down into the plastic and leave the plastic
Mhm.
collaring around the cutting.
Yep. That seems wise. All right. Okay. How wet is too wet? That's a question that's coming up a little bit. Is what, I think everyone here is like, oh, wet, willow will be fine. Or, elderberries will love wet, or pawpaws love wet feet. You hear these things, but it's like things, so at some point, a certain amount of wet is too wet. What does that scenario look like for willow? And I know it's going to be different for different ones, but
Yeah, it depends on the variety question. I mean, I've always read that for basketry willow, it doesn't want to have wet feet. And when I first planted some early on in the homestead, I just assumed willow grows by water, and I put my cuttings alongside my pond and they all died. But there are certain varieties that do really, really well for stream bank restoration, and they really thrive right there at the water's edge. I think it's one of the North American varieties that can be semi-invasive sandbar willow, and it will spread underground, but it really does well on stream banks for stabilizing soil.
Yeah, I absolutely. It's a misnomer to think that they don't want to be. They can tolerate standing water, but that's not. You don't. If you have an area standing water, you don't want to just plant willows in thinking it's going to be good, because they're going to be stunted if they do take. So, and I'd say that's a general rule. They will absorb water as they grow, and so it's very good for that. But even in stream banks, you do have to be careful how close to the edge you plant. So I mean, you want to put it almost in the water, but it doesn't quite work like that. So they're not like they're, yeah, there are other plants to plant like like I have all these bald cypresses growing. They love the water, but I, yeah, any area that we've had flooding other than periodic, I would say it's stunted the willow. So I'm pretty cautious about, I just don't recommend putting it in areas that are going to have standing water for more than a week or so at a time.
How many varieties would you recommend starting with to figure out, like, what do you think is a broad enough net to cast to figure out what's going to work well in your space?
I'd say 10 is enough. 10 to 20 is really enough to figure it out.
All right. Does that sound right to you, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I started because I had that, basketry pack. I started with six and then the next year did another six. So that was 12 total. But like I said, and then like for me, it's more what you're going to use it for and the varieties coming from that.
Okay, so we've got a set of questions about living fences and the interaction of these things with deer pressure. So specifically asking how deer and other animals are interacting with the fence. Like, is the fence actually, effective as a barrier?
I mean, it's the best. It's a very simple solution for it's not inexpensive to buy I really only recommend if you look at my website, you'll see I have a shop there and I've had to kind of I really recommend long rods, but there's different rod packages like there's something called border and hedge. So I've tried to address different financial needs and different people's perceptions of things. But honestly, if you really want to make a fence, the best thing to do is to get a 7 to 8 foot rod, which is what can be shipped, and weave it in place. And you've got a fence and it greens up within 6 weeks if it has the moisture and you do it. It'll root and green up, and it's a very effective right off the bat. I mean, it's a great border. Deer, we've used it here extensively. They don't really care. There's no, if you leave an opening, they'll come through it, but otherwise it's a great way to mitigate that issue. They don't like it because it's the salicin. That doesn't mean I have nurseries that have tried this because I do some projects in places. So if the deer are starving, they're still going to eat something, right? So depending on if it's a more urban area, there's more pressure, but they tend not to really like it. Although there are a few varieties that I know that they will eat, and so I just steer people away from that. So it's great for it. And again, I would really suggest using long rods because a lot of people want to just plant little pieces in the ground and try to grow up a woven fence. And yes, you can do it, but it's not really the right. It's going to take a long time, and it depends on your budget and on your ability to sustain the work that's required to do it.
And then the next question tied to this living willow structures piece is about maintenance. Like, what is required in maintaining these structures?
It can be from, if you go from 0 to 10, it can be for some people who really like everything to be perfect, who I have customers like that will actually fly to their place and I'll have 4 or 5 people helping have everything perfect and everything, woven in versus just keeping it very natural and lively. And if you come to my farm, it's very natural. I don't have the time to do it. It's okay. I mean, you just do a limited amount of maintenance. You might weave a few things back in. You might cut some things that are too heavy. You might have to replace something that from another growth nearby, but it can be as little or a lot, and I'm just talking about it, seeing the professionally how people, some people want it a certain way and some people, so there's no real exact way, but it does take some maintenance and no matter what, you can't just walk completely away from it.
Sarah, do you want to weigh in on deer or maintenance or both?
Well, deer, I mean, I have piles of deer poop up and down my aisles in the willow field, and they don't really seem to damage the willow. Every once in a while, we'll see that they nibbled, but we've been able to just let it go. Though I do know folks that have had to put up deer fencing because they were just really, especially in the spring, eating down the fresh new growth and really limiting the willow. And then,
That's the key right there is fresh because
yeah.
the youngest part, it doesn't have the salicin in it. That's when the most vulnerable is for the willow is
Right. So when you have your new cuttings that are putting off their first sprouts, if your deer are going to munch it all down, then your cutting isn't going to establish very well. And then for the structures, there's if there's like an interior and an exterior, I think just trimming down the interior rods that grow in, if you don't weave them back in, then just trimming them down so that they're not, filling up your interior structure. That's the only thing I've ever had to do.
What is the proper stage to harvest pussy willow for woody budding branches? And is there a drying and curing process?
The pussy willow buds will come out. They've got kind of a little skin on them. And I've found if I wait till all of the pussy willows have popped through that little skin and then harvest them, they're a lot more delicate. The pussy willows will knock off more quickly than if I wait or if I do it a little earlier when maybe the bottom ones still have that skin covering the silver bud. And you can just pull off the skin manually with your fingers and then for whatever reason, the buds tend to stay on a little bit longer. Once they're dried, they do become quite fragile, but they dry in the same way that they look when they're fresh. And so, from a floristry perspective, as long as you can keep them, out of harm's way so that you're not knocking off all of the buds over time, they do beautifully dried for years, but they are delicate.
Mhm. And are either of you like growing and marketing floral cuttings at the moment?
I've done a little bit, but it's not, floral market, the wholesale pricing is so low. It's almost, I mean, you really have to do your own arrangements and go to market, I think, with it, unless you just can scale up and mechanize. And I just don't, it's very hard for me to see how that works financially as in a business but on a small scale, it certainly would work. And one thing to add about the pussy willows for people is that it takes about, I mean, unless Sarah has a different thought, the way I've grown them is I leave them alone for several years and let them branch out. It's not a coppice plant the way you normally do the other willows. So it depends. Yeah, and then I cut them higher up to where I want to cut them. And then every year you have to take them away or they'll keep the flowers are going to be higher and higher and up in the air and you won't be able to, you have to get up on a ladder to reach them if you're not careful. So it's a little different to try to do, especially the catkins. And if you wanted to, there's more varieties. I mean, I have pink ones and yellow ones and black ones, and I just don't really make a point of selling them. I'll sell cuttings sometimes if people ask. They're not really listed on I mean, I think I do have something on my website now, but I would say it's more of a small scale thing. If you're trying to wholesale, I think it's going to be really difficult. I've looked into it a little bit and it just didn't seem, I mean, I honestly didn't think it was worth the time it took to cut everything and sort it and bundle and count it. That said, I had one customer that bought, a lot of stuff for high-end arrangements for a while until he decided to retire. So I haven't found that person yet again, so
I think they do well at market, especially, at farmers markets that
farmers
are
market.
year round
Yeah.
where you have that February, March before the florals really get going. The pussy willows definitely have a thing. And in Europe, pussy willows at Easter are a big deal. And so anybody that's kind of got that association, they're looking for them around Easter.
Europe actually uses more willow in their floral arrangements. They don't not just flowers, they use the color sticks.
Mm.
That becomes part of the arrangement. So but you could see that stuff coming from China and stuff, and it's and I don't know, just that's not a market. Farmers markets. I used to make my gas money with pussy willows when I was first making baskets because I was always wondering if I was going to sell a basket. So I always, I had enough money for gas back.
So next up is, can you talk about native willow and how to identify? Thinking about long-term spread of the potentially invasive plant without humans to maintain it.
Well, I only know of the one, the sandbar willow, which I purchased from somebody up in Wisconsin that had cut it wild. And I think, like most invasive things, they're only invasive when they're outside of the environment where they're supposed to be. And so for me, it hasn't been a big deal. I have my rows, and the rows that were planted with that variety, I can see rods coming up in the pathways. So I can tell it is spreading underground and coming up, but I don't know what it looks like out of control.
Yeah, this topic is one that I don't, it really seems it's not a plant like multifloral rose or it's not a plant that's gonna take
It's
away
not, yeah, it's
something
not
from
bamboo.
yeah, because it's a succession plant. If you see the like our wetlands here have black willow in it, and they're beautiful and they're great for the habitat. And at some point when it changes, it's all going to be gone because it's not a terminal plant. It's not it grows in a certain type of environment naturally. I know for both what Sarah and I both do, which is we coppice, there's no chance of anything spreading because I have some varieties that I have that are all female or all male. So I know very specifically they can't bear seeds. They genetically don't connect that way. The only way they can propagate is really by cuttings. So I've kind of gotten this topic. I've heard it a lot, and honestly, I don't. If you look at the Salix family and start to understand it, they're so close. Some of these varieties, they're just slight hybridized. There's no way to look at the pure that there's purity, in my opinion. There are people who've studied willows their entire career, and they kind of gave up trying to identify them fully because there just been too many crossovers. And I know that for some people they're sensitive about it. I try to talk to them in a nice way, but I don't think it's as big of issue as folks want it to be. But it's everybody has their perceptions about that. But that's been mine.
So we've got a couple minutes left. I want to try to get two more questions in. The first is, when you decide which varieties of willow aren't working, what do you do with the plantings? Do you let them go wild? Do you rip them out? How do you get them out of there?
If you're using plastic, just put a piece of plastic on top of after you cut it all the way down and put a piece of plastic on top, and it will no longer have light. That's the easiest if you're using plastic. I don't know. I mean, if you rip the roots out of the ground, there's still a chance, like any plant, that it's possible its roots. And I don't have any other experience in that. It's kind of that really is the only thing I know is to cut the light off to it.
I've not had a hard time pulling out the ones that needed pulling out. Most times I'm pulling it out because it's not doing well. Howard mentioned black mall, and I think when you look at the Facebook willow groups, everybody in North America has had a hard time with black mall. It's not happy here, which is interesting because it's one of the most common varieties, like in the UK. Everybody uses black mall, and for us, it just doesn't work here. So you try it doesn't work, and you just pull it out and was unhappy. So it's not like, kudzu where you've got this massive root ball that is sent crowns in every direction and it wants to live. And with any plant, I mean, if you cut it down enough times, eventually you would exhaust your roots and they will die down.
Yeah, that's true.
So last question is kind of nichey, but what have you found about the effect of soil type and location on color?
Yeah, I mean that's the one I've experimented with. Mineral content definitely affects the color and viability of the plant. So you just have to. I'm still waiting for my son, who's a PhD in soil, to take samples of our soil so I can then correlate it to my observations. But we still haven't done that. So I'm sure he's not listening because I was trying to. But that would be the thing for me to do because I have it in enough places to kind of, and I've placed them purposely. And there definitely is the color is better in certain places. Like if you're trying to get reds, they won't grow red everywhere.
Mm.
Uh, some of the yellows and oranges are more vibrant in certain soils than in other soils. But I have a 130-acre farm, so I have a lot of different locations. I have upland and downland and wetland, and I that's why I can test it out. But yeah, unfortunately I can't. I wish I could give you the exact ingredient and say if you had this mineral it would give you better red. I still can't say that, but maybe in the future I will be able to.
Yeah, well, and I've never read in any of the willow growing literature like anything. It's not like hydrangeas where if it's alkaline, it's one color, and if it's acidic, it's another color. But yeah, soil definitely, like when I first started planting, the colors in my field, the reds and the oranges are extremely vibrant. I have a harder time getting the more mellow greens and grays, which is my personal favorite, to come out. My soil really, pulls the reds and the oranges out of the willow. But I think, this is you're in a relationship. This is a plant you're going to have for, hopefully a couple decades. And so you kind of just see what colors your soil pulls. It's like an adventure.
I think you could probably add some liquid. I mean, you could definitely fertilize and mulch it and create, some additional nutrients for the plant. So, but that's something I haven't still done. I'm slowly set. We're set up to do it now, but we'll see if someone actually does it on the farm.
There's still more willow adventures to be had, it turns out. Many, many more. So we're going to leave it there. I think that both of these two will speak with folks and consult on willow occasionally. If you would like to reach out to them, you now know where to find them. And I hope that everybody's had a great time listening in today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Howard. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really appreciate y'all being here.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. We hopefully see you next week.
Yeah.
Bye.